Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Real Estate Live UK, a week-long programme of events aimed at bringing the property sector together to talk about challenges and opportunities as we work through these unprecedented times. Now we're on day 2 of Real Estate Live, and yesterday we literally travelled around the UK. This morning we are focusing on what is the greatest city in the world, I'm sure you'll all agree, London, and we have a London panel this morning which we're delighted is brought to you in partnership with London Square, and we're going to kick off this session in just a few minutes by asking the Deputy Mayor of London for Business, Rajesh Agrawal, to give us a keynote opening speech. But first of all, for those of you that are watching, I just want to just share with you that we do want you to talk to us this morning. This is very much supposed to be a two-way conversation, an opportunity for you to put your questions to our panel that will be joining us after Rajesh. So just to remind those of you that are new to Zoom, I'm sure there's nobody out there that is new to Zoom, but just to remind you of how this works, you do have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which you can put in your questions. And our chair for this morning, Claudette Forbes, will ask those questions on your behalf. But we'd also like you to chat with us using that chat function that you will see on your bottom of your screen. So do use that to comment on maybe what people are saying, or share links or examples of projects that you might be involved in. So we've got a great day planned, and as I say, a great opening session, all about London. How will London work? How do we get London back to business in these strange times that we find ourselves? So without further ado, I'd like to invite the Deputy Mayor of London for Business, Rajesh, to give us his opening thoughts on this really important subject. Rajesh, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. These past few months have posed challenges both for our economy and the lives of Londoners. Businesses have had their revenues severely impacted, and sadly we have seen some business closures, and many are still struggling to afford direct costs such as rent, and they've had to furlough staff or make them redundant. With further restrictions now in place and the clear possibility of more to come, it is clear that without further financial support from the government, we will see many more businesses going under. The Mayor and I recognize the necessity of further restrictions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. In fact, our view is that it's better that the measures are put in place sooner rather than later, so that we can halt transmission before it gets out of control and avoid the situation that we had in March, which necessitated a full lockdown because the government was too slow to act. The Mayor and I have repeatedly called on the government to bring in a fully functional test and trace system into operation, which is fit for purpose. This is essential to support the economy and protect the public. There is no doubt that the economic crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic will be prolonged and far-reaching. The Mayor and I will be working with councils, business and civil society to shape London as a city that can prosper while remaining open, safe and attractive to Londoners, visitors and investors. Through the pandemic, we at City Hall are working hard to support businesses and the London economy. TfL are doing everything they can in their power to maximize safe travel capacity. In fact, the network is now running at near 100% capacity. We have listened to the needs of business and launched a new London Business Hub, providing one-stop shop of free support initiatives and funding opportunities to SMEs of all sectors to help businesses facing the dual challenges of COVID-19 and a no-deal Brexit. The Paid Forward London platform enables small businesses to crowdfund from their supporters. So far, almost £500,000 has been raised for London businesses. And we recently created a £1 million match fund to provide further support of up to £5,000 for participating businesses, called it the Back to Business Fund. London and Partners, our official agency for trade, investment and tourism promotion, has launched Because I'm a Londoner campaign, which is built around a London alliance to restore consumer confidence. The Mayor is also urging London's major commercial landlords to support tenants facing rent difficulties. And TFL is leading by example with rent relief for SMEs across its significant commercial estate. We are acutely aware of the immense difficulties faced by the business, particularly in retail, leisure, hospitality, located within the central activity zone impacted by a decrease in footfall. Along with business voices, the mayor has been calling on the government to extend the business rates holiday to next year for a direct financial aid scheme for retail, hospitality, and leisure businesses in central London. And whatever the short-term impacts and measures, we cannot simply bury our heads in the sand when it comes to the way the pandemic and its impacts are changing our city and our economy. Trends which are emerging now, some as a direct result of the pandemic, but some which are merely being accelerated by it, are going to impact on the way our city works long after we have eradicated or at least learned to live with COVID. To make sure we are prepared, the mayor is about to commission a major piece of authoritative research that will help City Hall and partners across London understand central London and the northern Isle of Dogs' long-term economic future, make recommendations as to what strategic and policy directions can be taken to ensure it remains a globally competitive hub for commerce and culture. This will certainly involve exploring the future workplace and patterns in London. Working with London Recovery Board, a partnership with London councils and other agencies, the mayor has also announced a suite of recovery missions themed around what Londoners and businesses have told us as are their priorities: supporting jobs, supporting high streets, and making London greener, healthier, and more equal. One of the missions vital to the recovery is High Streets for All. This mission aims to deliver enhanced public spaces and new uses for the underused high street buildings in every borough by 2025. Together, we need to take this opportunity to rethink the way we live and move around the city, to promote more self-sufficient neighborhoods, enhance public space, and provide local amenities. 90% of Londoners live within 10 minutes of their local high street, and this means that we must support local authorities and town centre partnership to work with community groups and private sector to plan for, safeguard, and directly deliver a diverse, resilient, and thriving mix of high street and town centre activity within easy reach of all Londoners. A sustainable recovery must seek to bring vacant and underused buildings to productive use, promote local employment and near home working, protecting existing community and cultural spaces, and introducing new types of businesses and civic organizations. We plan to continue working together with business on London's economic recovery in the years ahead, including how we can support businesses to create new, well-paid jobs for those who need them the most, and how we can invest in skills and training programs to get Londoners from all backgrounds into work. We will also focus on how we can accelerate job creations through green jobs such as in renewable energy. So far, we have already made progress in working with companies to fast track £1.5 billion worth of infrastructure projects over the next 2 years, which will help to stimulate our economy, create jobs, and support Londoners. Although the challenges are great, and there will also be opportunities as we emerge from this crisis. To harness them, we must focus on how we can help people live healthier, happier lives by fostering emerging technologies, entrepreneurial zeal, and innovation to provide good growth, giving people well-paid, rewarding jobs. I know that you will all have a part to play in shaping this recovery. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Rajesh. Very thought-provoking. Lots going on, lots of things happening, and a lot of what we were hearing there, we will be talking about, I'm sure, in more detail now in this panel, and indeed in many of the other sessions that we're running as part of Real Estate Live this week. So now, just before I hand over to our panelists and our chair for this morning, we are running a poll, which I'd like to invite everybody who's watching to take part in. This is a poll that we're running throughout the week just to see what people think their priorities are. If you can just take a few moments, what is the most important factor in unlocking development and ensuring the continued strength of UK real estate? And many of the options here have already been touched upon by Rajesh. Investment in transport infrastructure, we've heard how the Mayor is already doing that. Investment in technology and digital infrastructure, building a carbon zero sustainable future, investment in innovation, via grants, FDI and inward investment, and delivery of housing. Now, for some reason, my screen is telling me that none of you can vote. So I don't know why that would be, technical glitch. So we'll just move on, and I'm sure we will sort that out and come back to that in a few moments. So for now, thank you, as I say, to Rajesh. I'm now going to introduce Claudette Forbes. Now, Claudette is known to many London boroughs. She's a regeneration specialist who has worked alongside many local authorities over recent years. Claudette, delighted to have you with us this morning, and over to you to introduce our panel and take the conversation forward.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Delighted to be here, and also being able to listen firsthand to what people have to say around this very important topic. So it's not about me, so I'm going to immediately introduce our first speaker, Darren Nathan, to say a few words about his thoughts on this topic before moving through our panelists and then on to Q&A. And just to reinforce, could people reserve typing in their questions till we get to the Q&A session at the end of the panel, just once our panelists have had a chance to speak for a few moments. Thank you.
Claudette, thanks very much. And I must say, I didn't expect with a panel as broad and as experienced as it is that I would be the first to speak, but I'll take it and welcome it. Thank you very much. I think this is a really broad subject. It's one that we're really pleased to support. As London Square, we're a house builder. We've been around for 10 years and are in one of our most busiest periods ever, which is quite ironic given the circumstances that we find the sector in. I think it's really important to understand that if you look at the 4 biggest contributors to British GDP, we're talking about services, the service industry, the manufacturing industry, construction industry, and tourism. And I think the 2 of those, then services and tourism, are so heavily impacted that you have to look at how we are going to contribute as a sector to what's going on. That is residential, it's commercial, it's leisure, it's the placemaking, it's how we can take old and estates that are now energy inefficient and property which needs to be redeveloped and start to create places. Avoiding short-term, there's something going on at the moment which is a bit sort of short-termism. We're all reacting to something that we haven't really had a chance to really soak in and understand. And yet, really, we have to start thinking about the generations going forward and how we deliver for them. When you look at some of the estates that were built 30, 40 years ago, they were built for periods of 50 plus years, and we have to think going forward. So as London Square, we've got projects we're working on the former Holloway Prison. We're working in Neasden with Clare Housing Group. We've recently been awarded a really exciting project in Waltham Forest, which is to create a new thoroughfare for the borough at Leadbridge station sites. And I think it's critical for us as a sector to come together. I think unless we are working and bringing together all of our USPs and all of our skill sets to bring land, estates, construction, delivery, management, and the design that goes with placemaking, I think we're going to miss out on what is, for us right now, an absolutely huge opportunity to get things right.
Thank you very much, Nathan. A call for action and partnership working to help get us through this. I'd like to now hear from Councillor Shama Tatler, who's the lead member for Regeneration, Property and Planning at London Borough of Brent. If you'd like to share with us your thoughts on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudette, and morning everyone, and thank you for having me here this morning. So my area of focus really is on how councils can best support regeneration, growth, and how we support the economy and obviously our residents going forward. So those of you that don't know Brent, we're based in sort of northwest London, home of Wembley. We border Harrow in the north, and we go right down to Kilburn in the south. So it's a very varied borough. We've also pre-lockdown had, some of the variances around jobs are 14,000, approximately over 14,000 SMEs based in the borough. Some of our average wage in Brent is around £36,000 a year. It drops down to 18 in some of our kind of most deprived wards. So there's a real need around rebuilding and what we want to do post-COVID about how we rebuild the economy and make it more inclusive and opportunities. We're also very well known for house building in Brent. If you go anywhere in the borough, you'll probably see cranes all over the place because we are building at speed, and that is something that we want to see continue. Housing is a huge priority for us, particularly affordable housing. So in terms of what I see the public sector and councils looking to do in terms of supporting business, supporting the economy, supporting our residents is really on twofold. Obviously, there's the well-being aspect, and I think we still have to see the fallout of how people will end up working and living. I'm not certain that people are going to be 100% home working. I don't think that's actually good for our well-being in terms of mental health and isolation and social interaction. So I think there'll be an element of practical and flexible working. I think that'll be more and more apparent. Brent is one of the most connected boroughs in London, and we do have a very good public transport system, and I do think public transport will need to be looked at to see how we drive more development and more growth, and upgrading it considerably. And I think elements of how we councils and local authorities play a role in upskilling and the skills agenda is going to be huge in terms of how we, the point was made by Darren about younger generations and moving forward. Actually, there is an opportunity for growth and there is opportunity for new technologies, and particularly in the green sector, but we need to kind of empower councils to support them to make sure that they've got a clear strategy. I'm not certain that throwing money at schemes is always the only answer. What we need to have is a clear strategy from national government about how we upskill residents, how we upskill young people in making sure they're able to access these jobs. And I think town centres and planning is hugely important here as well. It'll be interesting to see how the planning reforms end up coming forward. But we're working really hard in Brent to make sure that we revitalise our town centres with that thought that people live 10 minutes within a town centre, and supporting the transport networks to do that. So I think councils have a really important role here to play, and in Brent we're not slowing down our ambitions for growth and development and making sure it's inclusive. We're set to keep on to our target of building direct delivery of over 1,000 council homes by 2022. So we're not shy of continuing that going forward, and we're very keen to make sure that local business and SMEs are able to access that opportunity. So it is about making sure that we're working with the private sector to enable growth and inclusive growth for our residents. I'll leave it there because I think I'll have opportunities to answer any questions, but essentially it is about how we can work in partnership.
So there's been a strong theme around partnership coming through our last speakers, and also good to hear that Brent is not slowing down. It's going to keep pushing through, particularly on its important housing targets. So we've just got to keep going. We're turning to another London borough, this time Waltham Forest, where we'll now hear from Councillor Clare Coghill, who is the leader of Waltham Forest Council. Thank you, Clare.
Thanks so much, Claudette, and a real treat to follow Shama. Good morning, everybody. I'm really enjoying this session so far, and hope I can come up with some helpful things to contribute, really. I think I love Shama's message. Brent really does mean business, and so do we in Waltham Forest. I think the outer London boroughs, we found our identity. We know what part we can play in the success of the city, this great city we call home, and we can be very, very ambitious for our boroughs and for all of our residents. something that I wanted to talk about, because I think it meshes a lot of these things together, is around making sure that everybody in our boroughs can get everything that they need and get about to live their lives in a 15-minute radius. I saw what Paris was doing and or talking about doing, and had the conversations internally, and we realised that we've already done that in big chunks of Waltham Forest through the Mini Holland scheme, which is now called Enjoy Waltham Forest, but heavily supported by Sadiq Khan as mayor. And making sure that we've got that type of connectivity, and we've got those thriving high streets that are invariably small businesses owned and run by people who already live in the borough. That's a huge part of what we want to see more of. We've got a great track record, I think, in terms of working in partnership with the development sector, and I just wanted to pay tribute really to London Square and others for the quality of what they put forward, and the fact that there is genuine commitment for the sector to be seen as a constructive partner, not just to local authorities but to communities at large. And that social value, all the jobs that are created through development, is something that you should be very proud of as a sector. And voices like mine and Shama, if you tell us the stories about the impact that you're having for our residents on those sites, then we can help communicate that wider message, because it is there and it is really positive, but we just need to know about it. Shama's point about jobs. I've got 38,000 working age people in my borough who are either furloughed or receiving other government support to make ends meet. There is fear out there. There is apprehension about whether people are going to be in jobs at the end of the year. So I think this is the moment for us as public sector leaders to articulate a message of hope and growth. But that people will need to be retrained. And I'm pleased with some of the announcements that the government's made. And, you know, I'm conscious of the fact that people on this call will be hugely skilled people who probably don't have much cause to reach out to adult learning services. But just to give you a taste of some of the changes that have affected our residents. The government made changes so that people have to now pay effectively a student loan to do really quite low level qualifications, and the fact that people have to jump through those hoops and make that financial commitment just makes it unrealistic for many people. So it's about making those opportunities free or cheap so that people can take control of their own lives and their own destinies and make sure that they're earning. But I did just want to give you an example of the kind of thing that we've seen through this period, and something the sector can be rightly proud of. But we need to hear more of these stories so that we can articulate them. So there was a young lad who'd lost his job at the start of COVID. He applied for a job and was retrained to work on a TfL site. His ambition is now to be a crane operator. That young man has taken opportunities that were given to him that wouldn't have been there if my council hadn't granted permission for that scheme, and if TfL hadn't taken an innovative approach to its own land and wasn't seeing the opportunities that exist in boroughs like mine. So that's just one example of a young man who's now working, learning and earning in our great city, and it's the construction sector that can rightly be proud of that. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much. And also for reminding us of the actual reality for a lot of individuals who have been furloughed or who've been made redundant. So there's a big task to be had there. And also your kind of bigging up of London Square gives me an opportunity to correct myself for calling Darren Nathan. we knew I was going to make that mistake. People with first names. So Darren from London Square, big up to you from Waltham Forest leader. Can we move now to the RSL sector? We're going to hear now from Jacqueline Esimaje-Heath, who's the Regional Director at L&Q. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you, Claudette, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. Like for many others, for us, the pandemic and lockdown has created huge impacts on our business and our ability to meet our social mission. As a housing association and developer, we've seen our development sites delayed, we've seen reduction in our sales and rental income, our customer call volumes have reduced, and our service demands have fallen. However, things now seem to be stabilising. We are seeing increased activity across all areas. Our site productivity levels are good and improving every day. That said, due to the pandemic, we will deliver fewer homes this year. We were expecting to deliver over 4,000 homes, with over 3,000 of those being in London. We could see those numbers reduced by a quarter. We're monitoring it, and we'll see where we are at the end of the year. Demand is higher than ever, as increasing economic and employment uncertainty for many people means that the need for affordable housing, and rented housing in particular, is absolutely critical. Therefore, our intent is to deliver more homes than ever. It's more focused than we've ever been. Two of the key ways we'll be doing that is increasing our impact by undertaking joint ventures, so partnerships, and focusing on our long-term, medium to long-term land supply. Lockdown has also demonstrated the desperate need for good quality housing and the importance of private amenity space, how important that is to health and well-being. So this was always important to us, but it's going to be pivotal in our approach going forward. We also need to think carefully about the future integration of commercial and retail into our development schemes, because of the pandemic, the future of those sectors is really uncertain, and we need to understand how that impacts on the communities that we're trying to create. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That's really interesting. And of course, the inevitable thing linked to what Councillor Coghill was saying about people losing their jobs is then the increased demand for affordable housing. So people who are probably in the private rented sector who are now finding themselves, actually, you've probably got a new cohort of people demanding social housing. So that's really interesting. I just want to move on to the final member of our panel, John Neal, who's Head of UK Research at JLL, to give us his thoughts on this topic. Thank you, John.
Thanks very much, and hello everyone. Well, it's certainly been an interesting year from my point of view. I'm tasked with trying to understand what's happening in the economy, in the property market, and give some thoughts on where things are going. I mean, it's the most sudden and dramatic change in the way our cities operate, I think, probably in the 20th century. I mean, obviously there's wartime, but in some ways, and I'm not trying to compare COVID to the Blitz, of course, there was more continuation of life perhaps during the war in some ways than there has been over the last year. And we've gone from the situation where, in my line of work, we think about contacts and getting people together as a thing which really helps the economy, to something which becomes a major health risk. And of course, that face-to-face contact, what economists call agglomeration, is right at the centre of why our cities, and particularly London, are such successful places. And I think one thing that's brought into real focus is how dependent a lot of UK cities are, it's not just London, are on public transport. I think about 95, and this is really a central London problem, but it applies to all of London. About 90% of people working in central London come in by tube or train. About another 5% come in by bus. So that is, for me, is one of the most fundamental issues, because there's so much nervousness around getting on public transport, overcrowded or not. It's just worth pointing out that actually applies to some other cities. So if you go to places like central Birmingham, central Manchester, central Glasgow, they are almost as dependent on public transport as London, although the wider city is not, and that's really the big difference. In terms of looking at what's happened over the last few months, one thing we have noticed is that smaller cities and suburbs are generally recovering more quickly for fairly obvious reasons, I think, and that's around the transport issue and the local issue. Whether this is going to stick, I think one of the issues we've seen over the past few months is that people assuming that the short term will become the long term. We don't know yet whether this is going to be a long-term revival of suburbs, local areas, smaller towns, or indeed whether that will be a good thing, because it may well just exacerbate existing divides. People with money tend to go to certain places, and people without are kind of left behind. And actually, working from home and more local activity might actually be a problem, and actually produce all sorts of social problems we haven't really thought about yet. The question we're being asked more than anything else at the moment, though, is what's happening to the office, what's happening from working from home, and what does that mean for the future of the cities? Undoubtedly, things are going to change. We are going to see more home working, but as time goes on, it's becoming more apparent, and we're already seeing this in terms of what some of our clients are saying. It will become much more apparent that actually face-to-face contact collaboration is really what what makes things work. And I think that's, again, one of the things that's perhaps misunderstood in terms of home working. People often will say, well, I'm just as productive working from home, but that's individual productivity. You have to think about company productivity, and that's where the face-to-face contact is actually more important. There's all sorts of evidence to show that if you move innovative people from kind of small towns to big cities, they suddenly come up with more ideas, more unusual ideas, more inventive ideas, and that's to do with that random contact that's so important in cities. So from my point of view, for London, and given London's central role in the UK economy, it's absolutely important that we get that process moving again. But there are other things though that we're being asked about. Obviously, everyone knew the retail market was in trouble, but it's become apparent. I mean, the physical retail market, the online retail market, is doing quite well. It's become very apparent, I think, how dependent our city centres are on office footfall. We've seen a lot of debates around that over the past few weeks. The other big challenge for London, and this hasn't been mentioned, and it's a real challenge, and it's not mentioned much actually in the press more generally, is urban logistics. How do you get those, as more people go online, more people shop online, how do you get the warehouses into central London, into inner London, that distribute those packages to people? Is home delivery really a viable option long term, or do you need a more sophisticated method around collection points? The other thing that many investors are looking at the moment is how, where do I put my money? And I think the private rented sector is increasingly important to them. Just thinking ahead though, in terms of the what we can do to try and ensure London's future, the most important thing to me, and it's absolutely central to London's attractiveness, is why I moved to London from the Midlands 25 years ago. It's the cultural vibrancy, it's the things to do, it's the bars, the restaurants, the theatres, the gig venues, etc. And if we don't do something collectively to save those and get them through this problem, London will become a less attractive place to go to ultimately, and we could end up with a vicious cycle of decline. So it's absolutely important that we maintain that. The other thing really is just, and this has been echoed elsewhere, is what's happening with transport. We have to carry on investing in transport, but to me it's two things. First of all, it's the active transport mechanisms, or the active transport modes that everyone else has talked about, but it's also thinking more cleverly about how we can make public transport more accessible for people who are concerned about COVID, so staggering journey times into the workplace, or perhaps introducing more flexible season tickets. You don't have to buy the whole week. You can be more flexible in your approach. The other thing that I think London really needs to work on, and I think it's a weakness compared to some other cities, is the quality of its public spaces. There are some fantastic public spaces in London, but if we're going to have more people living outside and wanting more fresh air, we have to work on that area as well. And that's not to demean the fantastic places we have in London. It's just perhaps there aren't enough of them, and we need to think about how we can upgrade other parts of London as well. So that's it from me. I'm not sure what happens now.
Wow,
I'm sure we'll find out.
That was amazing, John. Really, really wonderful, kind of a whole host of nuggets there around it. And I actually wanted to kind of invite the other panelists to comment on one thing that you talked about. And it's really around some of the changes that have happened during this pandemic. Before we open up the floor to the audience members, please start to put in any questions that you may have. But I just asked the first one because I'm the chair. But so Will, you very helpfully stated this in a wonderful way. Will the short term become the long term? And I think that's really interesting. So this is about what's changing in London. And I just wondered whether any of our other panelists would like to come in to comment on that, on the changes that have happened in London in terms of living and working and culture even. Anybody want to volunteer? Okay, Councillor Clare Coghill.
Thanks very much. I think something that we've certainly seen in my patch is the real sense of community and people reaching out to their neighbours. We had 4,000 volunteers for our community help network, who, and just one statistic for you, they did 3,600 prescription deliveries to vulnerable residents who were shielding or unable to get out during COVID. And I think there's been a real sense of people wanting to support one another. And something I've had to reflect on is that sometimes the public sector has actually been a barrier to that, rather than an organisation to enable that, and giving people more, telling people really that we're here if they need us, and we will stand shoulder to shoulder with them if they need us, but that they shouldn't feel that they need to be given permission to reach out to their neighbours on their street, and that there's a lot we can do as individual communities.
Anyone else like to offer their thoughts on that? Sorry, Councillor Shama Tatler.
Oh yeah, so Claire had sort of my first point, actually, to the community element. I also think there's two other things that I think it's really, that I've seen changes, is the level of physical activity and the use of outdoor space, which I think John touched on a bit earlier with public spaces. I think particularly in the south of our borough, where it is more denser, you are finding people enjoying their outdoor spaces a lot more, and there is like sort of the feeling of the green, open space, air quality, all of those kind of conversations is increasingly something that we're having to look at how we address that at council level. So I think there's an element of how we look at open space and public space as well. And I think, you know, access to activity, or how our residents have that access, is really important for mental well-being as well as for physical well-being, and also that separation of work and home life.
Before I move on, so Daren, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think London is clearly changing, and one of the things we have to accept is that this has been a 9-month challenge that we've been going through, because it really starts at the beginning of the year, and therefore it's become our habit already. So the changes has happened. We have to embrace some of that change. And I agree entirely. I think we've all talked about placemaking and how those public spaces come alive. What we also have to accept is that we're in the UK, and in English weather, we don't get a full year of quality weather. So something has to change in the way we design and deliver our homes. And at London Square, we've got an exercise that we're conducting at the moment as how we can make, and let's think in real terms, 1-bedroom flats. I doubt there are many people in a 1-bedroom flat or a 2-bed flat with a family where working from home is the best working environment for them. If they've got outside space, then they've been blessed with some sunny weather. Maybe that happens up north, I don't know. But more importantly, we have to think about how we design spaces so that even a 1-bedroom flat has a private area that someone can close themselves away, do a bit of home working. And just one thing that mustn't change. If I said to you that we were going to run some apprenticeships and we were talking about bricklayers and chippies, you all know that we have to get those people working with experienced craftsmen on site and delivering on a project. If I then talked about architects, an architect cannot train their trainees and graduates over a glass screen. They have to be in the office talking to each other. And this is something John touched on, is really important to the future of London. And we have to get people back into work so that the young people that we want to be our future have got craftsmen to work from, whatever their role is.
Thank you very much for that, Darren. I'm going to actually give space for some of the questions which are coming in. And actually, Darren, one of the questions was from Carl Slater, who asked, will new homes include space to facilitate home working? I think you've just addressed that. But we also have a question on Neil, on John's point about logistics in London, the home deliveries. Neil Webster has asked, so John talked separately about logistics and active travel. What's the panel's view on use of cargo bikes for last mile delivery? John, would you like to comment on that? And then
yeah, sure. I mean, this is a fascinating topic, actually. We did some work with Westminster University last year, the industrial research team within JLL. We looked at home deliveries to offices in the central activities zone, and we looked at the routes that vans were taking. And basically, it was the most inefficient thing I've ever seen. Vans were just driving around the same small area of London, were spending much more time stationary than they were moving. And we came up with a number of proposals for walking deliveries. So you have a central depot, people simply walk with a kind of pannier type thing that they can take things to, or cargo. I mean, that's probably a more viable option in the central London. In inner London, certainly, you know, the use of cargo bikes is interesting. I mean, I think logistics companies are looking at how they can do this, and I think, you know, providing walking deliveries to the high density of offices, say in the West End of the city, would seem like a win-win on all fronts, because not only would it reduce traffic and probably reduce emissions, it would also reduce congestion, and it would also provide some additional exercise for the people who are involved in it as well. So it's a matter of coordinating that, and also putting in place the mechanisms to make that work. But there's a huge opportunity there, I think, because most of the increase in traffic we've seen in London over the last few years has been a result of light vans. It's not cars; it's light vans that are the problem.
Unless any of our other panelists want to jump in on that question, I can move on to another, which is around transport. And this is someone who's anonymous. It's really about inclusivity. So we're talking about things like the 15-minute city and all of that. But somebody's here has commented that, if you're elderly or you have a disability, that's even difficult for someone with mobility issues and health issues. And saying that sometimes bus stops are 3 street blocks apart in central London. So it's very difficult. And if you're carrying heavy loads, what can we say about that? How do we make sure that the transport improvements that we're bringing in place also are inclusive for people who may have mobility and other health issues? Who would like to comment? Councillor Tatler.
Yeah, it's something that we've been grappling with over the last couple of months, really, as we're designing, our low traffic neighbourhoods and some of our sort of cycling infrastructure as most of London boroughs are. And I think one of the key principles that we are guided by is that inclusivity in the sense that all road users and all people who use service using transport are able to access equally and properly the roads and then pavements and so on that they need to. So essentially what we're trying to do, and I think it's similar to when I've spoken to counterparts across London, is actually how we move unnecessary traffic, if you will. So actually encouraging behaviour change for those who actually are able to walk or cycle, and enabling them to do so. So therefore the road space is then safer for those who perhaps have mobility issues or visually impairment issues. It's about encouraging that behaviour change, and that's not going to be done. Something that's going to be done overnight or in a few weeks. It will take months of actually changing behaviours. I think that's the key aim, and it's something that we're going, as local authorities, as City Hall, as nationally, we're going to have that conversation as a cultural change for all of us about how we actually use transport. Do we need to use our car for a 10-minute journey, or can we walk and allow space to be created for other people to use it who do need to use the space? So there is that conversation, and it's going to take political and operational will to actually enable that change to happen. And it's not easy. Some of the things that my counterparts and I having to manage over the last few weeks has been difficult because people are fearful of change, and that's understandable. I think that's something that we're going to have to take people with us on that journey.
Councillor Coghill, you wanted to come in on that question as well?
Yeah, to agree wholeheartedly with what Shama said. I think we've been through this journey in Waltham Forest. It has been appallingly difficult. The abuse directed at me and other colleagues because we just wanted to encourage people who can walk to walk was like nothing I've ever experienced before or since, fortunately. But if you do it, and you keep at it, and you remember that fortune favours the brave, then the results are absolutely extraordinary. I've had conversations with residents where they've pointed out to me, I used to drive to those shops, and it's an unbelievably short distance. And then they've had change in their area, and now they're saying, and I walk and I feel better for it. We've got all of the anecdotal stuff, but the other point that I'd like to make is that the King's Fund did some work for us, and because of improved air quality in my borough, children born in Waltham Forest will now live on average 6 weeks longer, and we expect that figure to grow and grow and grow. This is life-saving stuff. This is stopping kids getting asthma, and this is improving the health outcomes for older people, particularly in this time of COVID, particularly if they've got underlying health conditions. What they definitely don't want is filthy air that will have an impact on their health.
Thank you very much for that. Darren, you wanted to come in quickly before I move on to the next question.
No, I was just agreeing with exactly what both councillors have said. I think the best people positioned to understand the scope and what needs to be done for people across the various boroughs, and it's not limited to Waltham Forest or to Brent. This is a London-wide, it's probably a UK-wide issue that has to be addressed, and I think I just support what they've said.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, the next question is probably going to be addressed to Jacqueline and also to Darren, because Stephen Riley asks, how will developers or RSLs cope if there's a big drop in property values? So, Jacqueline, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. How will we cope? And it's quite clear that housing associations, registered providers, we are much more susceptible to the private market than we were. You know, years ago we got a lot more grants. Now we use cross subsidy from private sale to meet our social mission. So we are susceptible to changes in the market. I think for the RP sector, one of the great things about our sector is that we are very well regulated. And part of our regulation, the regulator requires us to stress test our businesses to ensure that we are capable of weathering storms that occur. So we don't want storms to occur. We want to be able to make surpluses so that we can increase our output of affordable housing. But we can also weather those storms. Obviously, what that does is it reduces our capacity and it reduces our ability to provide new housing in future. So overall, market swings, market drops are not good. But I do feel that as a sector, we are quite resilient and are able to weather any storm that comes.
Okay, thank you. Darren, what about your business?
I think it's really interesting. We do a lot of work with the public sector and housing associations, and we can see the change and the tests that they're currently putting their businesses through and their organisations through. House building, for as long as I've worked in the industry and probably long before me, has always been very speculative. I think we have to keep sight of the fact that for the last 20, 30 years, we've never been building enough homes. Mm-hmm. And as we aren't building enough homes, we have homes that are getting older and less energy efficient. So, of course, there can be changes in the marketplace. We as a business, and I think across the sector, the house building sector, are very fleet of foot. We look at how we can manage the ups, the downs, and the sideways. And right now, we're in a very complicated and complex situation. However, we're looking at projects where our scheme in Croydon, 230 units in partnership with Clarion, first deliveries will be at the beginning of 2025. And we're looking at other projects that are going for 2024, and then other projects that will go through from 25 to 2027. And that is looking ahead, looking to the future, and making sure that I mentioned earlier short-termism, and how we need to focus on what we're trying to bring forward in terms of housing and housing solutions. There will be changes in the marketplace, there always have been, and we can respond to that, and we just have to have the financial capacity and the stability to make sure that we deal with those as they come along.
Thank you very much to both Jacqueline and Darren for answering that question. We have another question, a really fun question actually, serious question though, from Peter Sharratt. You know, and this speaks to the things like what's going to change for London in the future coming out of this pandemic. The Thames, the river, the idea of the river as a leisure and transport corridor. So this could come back big time. And what do organisations such as the Port of London Authority, what role do they have to play? Any of our panellists, perhaps John, the visionary, thinking about this, John, would you like to answer this question for us? So the Thames as a corridor, you know, the reviving the Thames as a transport corridor, and Jacqueline, you're indicating you'd like to speak about that too. Okay.
I mean, yes. I mean, that's something that should have been done years ago. I mean, if you look at most other cities with a big river in them, there's ferries running across it. It's used as a major transport corridor all the way through, and it's you know, it's a fantastic way to relieve the strain elsewhere. I mean, it's logistically, obviously, it's more difficult, but I mean, it needs to be done.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for the river. I think it is just our most untapped transport resource in London. We have our development, Barking Riverside, Barcelona on the Thames, as we like to call it, and we are hugely excited that we've got the Thames Clipper. We'll be stopping there. So absolutely, it is an incredible resource that is so underutilised. And I do think the Port Authority, they do have a really good, a big role to play in terms of developing that riverside transport infrastructure that London desperately needs.
I was in Amsterdam recently, and there's Amsterdam Nord, which is sort of the old industrial area, which is now a really vibrant area of interesting art activities, cafes, and so on. That's been revitalised through a ferry across the I think it's the Ij. But if you get that ferry, you really get it. I mean, just the volume of people on it who are commuting into central Amsterdam. I mean, the Clippers are great, but nothing like the scale of what you see in a city like that. Although obviously water's got a much more central part in Amsterdam, although maybe it shouldn't have compared to London.
Thank you very much for that. Just want to look to where the future jobs are in London. So we heard the Deputy Mayor for Business, and also Councillor Coghill, you hinted at this. Where will the future jobs be? We have the London Recovery Board, and everyone's working furiously to try to look at this. What do you think will be the key sectors that will secure London's economic future? Who'd like to answer that? Councillor Coghill.
Thank you very much, Claudette. Yeah, they're not, I don't think they're terribly well known, but the Institute of Employment sort of do this work on a national and regional scale to say what type of jobs will be needed and where is the growth. Social care will continue to be a huge area of growth, particularly the top tier jobs. We will always need good, skilled social workers, and that's where 2/3 of our budget is spent, and the vast majority of that is spent on the people who do that work. So from a public sector's perspective, I can see that growth carrying on. But I think what's often forgotten is a point that John made brilliantly, which is we need London to be this creative, exciting place that attracts people from all over the world. And that's as much about the job opportunities that exist here as it is about what those people who come to do those jobs can then do on the evenings and weekends as well. And there really is a crisis for culture in our city. And we were, of course, the first London Borough of Culture, so it's hugely important to us. But it's also part of what makes London great and what makes London exciting and innovative. And that's absolutely something that we must not lose. We have to keep that creativity, and we have to keep that fire burning, because it's what makes London distinctive in the world.
I think Nathan, sorry, God, I've done it again. Darren is agreeing with you, or Darren, would you like to say something to that? Okay. Well, let me just say there are a couple more kind of questions. Some of them are also comments. And there's something from Alan Crawford around home working. If this becomes the norm, there's potentially an opportunity to repurpose existing office and commercial buildings to address the issue of affordable homes, particularly as the centre becomes a bit more quiet, perhaps. Don't know whether that's the short term or it's going to stick for the long term. Councillor Shama Tatler, would you like to comment?
I think this is something that we've been looking at in Brent pre-COVID anyway, in terms of how we support our town centres, workspaces, and lifestyle changes and how people are living now. I think one of the things that we're looking to do, and the most recent permitted development changes may hinder that, but actually looking at how we strategically plan our town centres to enable the creation of footfall, obviously include residential, but also have elements of affordable workspace that creates that servicing for the rest of the high street. So I think it's work that we're actually actively looking to continue doing. Actually, it was something that was needed pre-lockdown and pre-COVID, but actually I think it's much more apparent at the moment that we're seeing a need for affordable workspace, we're seeing a need for housing, and town centres can do that. But I do genuinely think that it needs to be done in a kind of strategic, planned way to allow certainty and stability for the whole area. And we've got examples where we have very long high streets and the fringes actually serve no purpose because the quality of what they're offering is not particularly great. So if we can repurpose those shops and those retail spaces for either affordable spaces, workspaces, or potentially residential, or even particularly things like adult education services, which I think would be really important locally. You could actually really have quality high streets that are that people have a sense of pride and actually attract opportunity. So I think that's where it should be heading. It's not either or, but it's let's plan it strategically. So you're allowing to use this opportunity, if you will, to create and building back better.
That sounds really, really hopeful. And can I just say, for my part, so I live in Peckham in southeast London, right in the heart of Peckham Rye. And one of the best things during the lockdown was using a council multi-storey car park to hold concerts, socially distanced concerts. So you had the airflow going through. And I thought, this is fantastic. We should be using, these spaces and being really innovative. We had world-class musicians coming into the inner city performing, because they've got no other spaces to perform in. And I hope that that's one of the ones that will be sticking in the future. It was absolutely fabulous in the midst of all the urban noises of the trains going by and the birds and everything. It was absolutely fantastic. Sorry, Councillor Clare Coghill, I think you indicated that you'd like to come in there.
Yeah, I love that example though. That's London at its absolute best. And I love stories like that. I think just to agree with Shama again, as usual, but to add to that, one of the problems that we've got, and I think it's referred to in the question, is where you've got conversion that just doesn't involve anyone reputable from this sector and doesn't involve any input from the local authority. Jacqueline's nodding; she knows, because you'll be dealing with the people who are coming out of that sector. And you'll be aware of some of the horrors that they experience. And I don't overuse that word, but I think there's, I think of Walthamstow Market, right, which is my ward as well as the heart of my borough and our biggest town centre. But one of the problems we've had with the shop fronts for so long is that people have been able to get so much money from the rents above that they've just been able to basically ignore the commercial operation at street level and, just let anyone use it, a relative, a mate, and the quality of the high street has massively suffered as a result of that. And I just think there's something about, for this sector, to look at buying whole chunks of high streets and doing something different with the residential space above and something really innovative with the street scene below. Shama's made the points about people homeworking, needing that space to get out. We've known that for a long time in Waltham Forest because we had this disproportionately large number of freelancers, and we've done a lot to try and expand that, including working with money that Sadiq gave us at Central Parade, which is worth a Google if you haven't seen it already in my patch. But we have to embrace these opportunities, and we have to think really radically and positively, which I think we're doing in Brent and Waltham Forest, if we're going to get out of this situation stronger than when we went in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm aware that we're now fastly approaching the end of our session, but Jacqueline, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, it's just to support Councillor Coghill completely. I mean, the whole idea, particularly now as we see the shift to online retail and the kind of breaking down of the high street, that whole idea of curation and how you make high streets work, make them functional for communities, is a really important issue going forward in development.
Well, thank you very much. And I just want to sort of reassure some of the questions that we didn't have time to ask. Somebody kind of really pleading that we really look at that issues about bus stops and inclusivity around people with disabilities and other health issues. Also, what's going to happen with the whole, e-scooters? I've seen some near misses around where I live. Looking at consulting residents on changes that we might be making. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's standard practice. If you're any good at what you're doing as a developer or a local authority, you will be doing masses of consultation. So thank you very much to our panelists. This is a really interesting discussion and quite a wide-ranging ones of some of the issues that we're grappling with about London's future coming out of this pandemic. I'm sure I must now hand over to the team at White Label to conclude this session. Where are you guys?
Thanks very much, Claudette. I'm here. That was a very fascinating conversation. Lots of questions, lots of things answered, but also, lots more to discuss. And we'll be doing that throughout the rest of the day and throughout the rest of the week. Many of the things that were picked up on in the last hour are being thought about in greater detail as part of the programme this week. So do check that out. Just to let you know that the poll results that we did at the top of the hour, perhaps not unsurprisingly at the top was investment in transport and infrastructure at 37%, and second was investment in tech and digital, and investment in social infrastructure equaling out at 28%. Sorry, second place actually was carbon zero and a sustainable future at 31%, and probably what we would all have been expecting to see. So huge thanks to everybody for taking part. Just to let you know that we're heading over at 11 a.m. to the Upper Lee Valley, where we'll be talking about the importance of that region of London, and in particular the industrial sector, and then carrying on with that industrial and logistics theme at 12 p.m. when we'll be heading over to Kingston with Aviva Investments and the Borough Business Park, looking at the future of the industrial and logistics sector. And then finally this afternoon at 3 o'clock, in partnership with London and Partners and the NLA, we'll be doing the road, urban innovation and the road towards net zero. So picking up on that theme that we've already touched upon. So loads more to discuss. Do check out the whole programme for the week. But for now, thank you very much to all of our panellists, to Claudette, to London Square for partnering with this. Thanks very much, and see you on a session again soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.